Hello, everyone. I'm Dominique.
And I'm Christina, and we are the Connected in Glass podcast.
Every week, we will feature interviews with glass artists who speak to their creative processes and overcoming challenges.
These conversations are real and raw. We hope that by sharing these stories, you're able to find some connection and know that you're not alone. We just wanted to take a moment to thank you for listening to our podcast. We're super passionate about this project and work for hours every week to bring you this content. So if you'd like to help support us, please consider becoming a patron at patreon.com/connectedinglass. Also, please consider joining our Facebook group, Connected in Glass Community, where we continue the conversations from these episodes. We'd love to hear from you. Today, we're interviewing Jenine Bressner. Jenine is a glass artist from Providence, Rhode Island, who has been using soft glass to make jewelry since they were a teenager.
Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Thanks for joining us today.
It's a treat to be together.
All right, so first we want to skip the glass part of your life for a minute. Can you just tell us about where you live, what you enjoy besides glass, and then kind of work us into what you do for a living and how you got into working with glass?
Okie doke. So I have been in Providence, Rhode Island for most of the last 20 plus years. It's easy to lose track. And having such a stable base has enabled me to travel a lot. I was living illegally in warehouse spaces for at least a dozen years. And so whenever I got money, I would just use it to travel because my rent, including utilities for a long time, was less than $200. So I was really able to be very free. And then that also enabled me to not be beholden to like selling my work through galleries and stuff. And mostly I keep this small human alive, and our lives have really leveled up a lot during the pandemic because it was just in this time that they were able to wipe their own butt. And that really, it made me realize how stressful it was to have to wipe another person's butt every day for like so many years. So I have through the pandemic been regaining a sense of self as my child becomes increasingly autonomous. They just finished kindergarten, and now they're able to dress themselves in the morning, get their lunch together in the morning. Like they can do so much stuff on their own. And I feel like my job as a parent is to make myself obsolete. So I feel like kind of winning. And then I'm also fixing an old house by myself. And I mostly spend a lot of time getting rid of the stuff that my dad has hoarded. These are the things that occupy a lot of my time and brain space, other than whenever I can get on the torch or make anything, because I work in a lot of different media.
Wow, that's a lot, huh?
Yes.
And where is your torch set up? Is it set up at the old house that you're fixing up?
No, I bought the house where it is because it's just up a bike path from my studio, where I have had a space for the last 16 years in an old mill building. And so my torches and kiln and I own a laser cutter. All of that stuff is in the studio in the mill building. And then I bike between the house and the studio along a river through the woods. And it's a little bit more than a mile away. And I bought the house here because I hope to continue to have the studio for a while, but there's always a threat of gentrification and selling. And I have a plan B lined up in case I do get evicted from that building, which is another old mill building that's just like 3 blocks away from that one.
And how did you start working with glass?
I used to really love looking at the Lark Books catalog from North Carolina. And I remember once discovering there was a kit that was built around the Cindy Jenkins book, how to make glass beads. And the kit was called Everything You Need to Make Glass Beads for $99. And I ordered this in the mail. I was 18. I was a freshman at the Maryland Institute College of Art. And I started lamp working on the fire escape of the dorm, or like the balcony. And that was probably quite a spectacle. And I loved it so much, but they didn't have glass there. So I decided to transfer into RISD so that I could major in glass, where they don't teach torch work. or they didn't teach it at all when I got there. Like there was a grad student who was like trying to teach a lampwork class. They had maybe 4 torches, but only 2 of them could be for RISD students and 2 of them could be for Brown University students because it was on the Brown campus. And that grad student did not even know how to get beads off of mandrels. So there was not much. And I mean, I couldn't even get into that quote unquote class. So I feel very self-taught with lampwork, although I've been privileged enough to take a couple classes over the years with some real lighthouses like Lauren Stump or Christina Logan or some other people that hopefully we already know and love. But it's a lot of self-taught torch work, but I did learn how to blow glass and do kiln work and cold working and stained glass and all of these other techniques while I was at RISD that did inform my practice and the ways that I think about the material.
And can you talk to us a little bit about your design process? When you have an idea, do you just take it right into glass, or do you keep a notebook, or do you draw things out, write things out?
I have 30 years of sketchbooks, maybe more than that actually, because let's see, I am, tomorrow I'm going to be 42. And when I was 5, my dad kind of like scolded me. He's like, you should keep all your drawings in a book. Why aren't you doing it? Because I was like illustrating all these fashion ideas I had for clothes to make that were mostly inspired by existing doll clothes, notably of the line of Gem and the Holograms, which I don't know if anyone's unfamiliar with this. It was like a fashion doll that was similar to Barbie, but it had more humanistic proportions and was way punker and really cool. And the dolls actually came with like cassette tapes and had fluorescent hair and makeup. And the most electrifying component of that line of toys was the illustrations on the packaging, as well as the posters that came with those things. And I have to tell you, because the world, this is a very magical life I have been living. The name of the illustrator who did those images that really are better than the toys themselves, her name is Sharon Nattel. And I met her in a grocery store a few years ago because I was wearing a pin and she walked up to me and started talking to me because of this pin. And now she's my friend and I hang out with her at her house because she also happens to live in Rhode Island, because Hasbro is here in Rhode Island. So there are so many toy people and illustrators who are part of this wonderful community. The best thing about Rhode Island, other than this amazing industrial history, is that RISD and Brown and all of these places are perpetual magnets for interesting, creative, unconventional, thoughtful people, many of whom choose to stay here. And so there's this great density of amazing people who are actively using their lives to build the worlds in which we would like to live, whether it's being a farmer or making clothes or music or comics or working as like anything, me or her. It's wonderful that we're free enough here because it's not so prohibitively expensive like New York or Boston to be able to live and survive, but also have the wherewithal to imagine and play. And that's what I think being an artist is. It's like a very extended childhood where you get to play for your whole life. If you're like committed to making that work, if you're lucky enough to be able to.
Wow, that's so cool.
What a cool perspective. Oh my God. And how lucky to be able to meet somebody that you like really admired your whole life.
I still can't get over it. But you know, maybe it made me realize that maybe there are some people who look at my work and they feel kind of electrified by it. But we, as people who are alive at the same time, are resources who are available to each other in theory, you know, and how lucky for her to have begun speaking to me. And then for us to realize like, oh, yes, we ought to be friends. This makes perfect sense.
My gosh, that's so perfect.
Yeah.
What, so we know you love Rhode Island, but what brought you there in the first place? Did you know that this was the place you needed to be, or was it just happenstance that you moved somewhere that you feel such a connection to?
I was born and raised at the edge of New York City, and I went to a public high school that had an excellent art program. And the classrooms were decorated with posters from different art colleges. And one of the teachers really saw that I'm a lifer. She could tell since I was little. And she recommended that I check out the summer program at the Rhode Island School of Design. They had a pre-college summer program because she had suggested other programs that I had already done all of the others, which was the reason that I started taking college level art classes when I was only 14 years old, because this teacher was like, you should know about this, you would like it. So I did all these things. And then I went to RISD, the Rhode Island School of Design, for a summer, 1996, where I was in a very, very tiny jewelry program, and I learned how to forge and solder silver. And then I went to MICA for 1 year and then transferred to RISD to study glass, and have stayed here that whole time because of all of these reasons, some of which I've already said. But also the Industrial Revolution in the United States began here in Providence and Pawtucket, Rhode Island. And it started with textile mills. Then when those went south, both literally and figuratively, the next thing that came in was jewelry production, costume jewelry production, because they didn't have to invest in big machines, and it wasn't very complicated stuff to train people to do by hand. And so in all of these studios where I have lived and worked, there's a history of textile production and of jewelry production. And I feel like another link in a chain of the history of what's happened in these spaces. And my life is richer for being informed by it, even if only by some sort of like, I don't know, energetic residue, as well as the fact that in between the floorboards, I'm constantly finding rhinestones and beads, and the walls are literally full of treasure. One of the studios I lived in, we pulled apart some drywall to sort of reconfigure the space, and beads spilled out of the wall. And in the kitchen, the floor was covered in layers and layers of epoxy resin from enameling jewelry. It's really special.
That sounds so special.
Yeah.
And so fun to like open up a wall and just have beads still everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
So for people who haven't seen your work, can you describe your work and maybe
Sure.
what inspires you?
So I was talking about having all those years of sketchbooks, and I just look for beauty everywhere, and I see it all the time, and I always have, and I'll ask myself, why is it that I find it beautiful? And often it's because of gradients of color, gradients of size, smooth transitions. There's a sensitivity in those transitions, and it's like, oh, if I as a human try to recreate that beauty that I sometimes am just witnessing in nature or maybe in somebody else's work, I feel like there's just a carefulness about it that I think inevitably looks more compelling. So I don't usually draw ideas so much lately, and this has changed since I had a kid because I don't have as much time to be in the studio. What I do now a lot of the time when I go to the studio is I'll just make piles of ingredients, different kinds of components that I will take home and then configure into something larger while my kid is asleep. So the beads have gotten much simpler, so I can make more of them in less time. And what I find now also is that instead of drawing the ideas for pieces, I just write down lists of words, adjectives that are feelings that I want to combine into a piece, or just an idea of thinking about something in a new way, like incorporating a different material or thinking about something in different dimensions, like thinking about laser cut felt, but not as a flat thing, but rather as voluminous forms constructed from striation, much the way that somebody might think about 3D printed objects. It's a luxury for me to have the time to think about things. And so when I remember to take care of myself, it just often involves being undistracted and taking a walk around inside my head and asking myself these questions of like, what do I want to see? And this is what I strive for with everything I make. I want to see things I've never seen before. And so that's what I'm aiming for. I think color is the most accessible way to make life more beautiful and interesting and fun. And it's grossly underemployed in cultures where people tend to have less skin pigmentation, because maybe in colder climates, there are fewer tropical flowers and, exotically colored animals. And I find that people have such strong reactions to it, often negative, like it's threatening. Although I guess maybe it's just because people might see me as being so different that there's like some feeling of, oh, what, we must exclude you, you look too weird. That's been something that I have dealt with my whole life. But really what I'm saying, by wearing the things that I do, like this big necklace that I'm probably most well known for, that's like the most photographed and published piece that I made, is one necklace of dot beads, and each layer, each dot has at least 5 or 6 layers of color, and then there are hundreds of those on a lattice of sterling silver lined with silk on the back, and it's at least 5 pounds, and it grew over more than 20 years. But that's the billboard that says, I like to make stuff. Do you like to make stuff? Like my weirdo bat signal that's just trying to build a bridge to the others, because the easiest, fastest way to communicate with other people is by how we choose to adorn ourselves. What are our cultural signifiers? Do you like this band too? Or do you hate that politician? You know, whatever. You find your allies, or sometimes you can just feel it, like, oh, you didn't comb your hair, I think we would be friends.
And are you always bursting with creativity, or do you ever feel like it just stops? Like, do you get stuck?
Oh, no. I'm an overflowing fountain of love and ideas. It doesn't stop. Oh my gosh. And I'm beginning to witness more of this reflected in my child by hearing the things that they say, just like the things they come up with. And I wonder, is this how my parents felt? Like, it's a lot. It's a hell of a lot. And sometimes I guess I just almost don't quite know what to do with it. And I'm sure that there were lots of grown-ups who met me in my childhood who were just like, I don't know what to do with you. I don't know how to help you. You are light years ahead in a different direction. Best of luck.
How have you learned to be able to like get all of that out of your system, or even cope with like not being able to get it out of your system?
I try to do a few of my favorite things every day. That includes riding a bike, singing, perhaps dancing, talking to friends, or writing or drawing, or thinking with my hands. Like, even if it's sorting beads or untying knots or like ripping out stitches or something, there's something so satisfying about being able to be productive in a way that you can see represented visually. So even if it's just like going through the piles of things in the studio, tidying up the house, or folding laundry or something, it feels good to accomplish tangible things. And as long as I do at least a little bit of that every day, like my list of things to do is so long, even if I'm only accomplishing a single digit percentage of it, I'm still doing a ton of stuff, because there's just so much to be done. I accidentally became an antiques dealer because I'm trying to help clear out the hoard. So I now have 2 booths at the Rhode Island Antiques Mall of like vintage toys, because my dad used to just buy. He had a very stressful job growing up, and his way of relaxing was like going to flea markets and yard sales. And when I was growing up, I think there were a lot of toy stores going out of business in New York. And so he would just get all of these things for 50 or 75% off and then put them in a trunk. So now I have trunks and trunks, like 50 trunks of toys from the 90s that are mint in box, and have been selling them off for a year. On Instagram, that's Make Believe RI. And I'm not an online person, really. I don't post much of anything anywhere. My cell phone is from 2007. I don't look at a smartphone very much. So that enables me to be present even more, because I don't like being distracted by screens. They're so magnetic and potentially addictive, but I really want to not let those things steal my time.
And I was wondering, so you said earlier that because you are so different and you're so much yourself, that sometimes people don't know what to make of you, or maybe you don't seem to fit in. And you kind of laughed it off a little bit. And I just wonder, a lot of us feel that way sometimes. And the joy of being able to laugh that off is beautiful. But was there a process that you went through to be able to like be comfortable being yourself, or is that just naturally?
Oh, I'm lucky that I feel like I got to go through that all when I was very, very young, because I was a latchkey kid since I was like 5. So it was very free to do. I mean, I had an older brother who was 2 years older than me, and sometimes there was a grandparent around. But from the time I was 10, when I got home from school, it was just all me. So I would do these weird things like our backyard in New York was a public park on the water, and I would just like walk there with a bag of wax chunks for casting candles and a butter knife, and I would sit on an overturned, rotted out rowboat and carve tiny heads out of wax. Or I would just make up the weirdest art projects with whatever I could find, because that was possible. In being alone so much, I think that there were some kids who were mean to me, but I always tried hard to be as kind as possible, because I never wanted to make other people feel the way that I was made to feel when people were unkind. And so I realized that I was trying as hard to be as nice as possible, and people were still mean to me. So probably I wasn't the actual asshole. And that made me feel like, okay, so probably the most important opinion in my life is going to be my own, because I know myself. I'm trying hard, really, really all the time, trying hard to not be mean to people. And if they have a problem with me, it's probably something that they're like projecting. But I also have to say, I think I was partially raised by Ricky Lake and Montel Williams. And if you don't know who those people are, feel free to look it up.
Okay, that's really relatable though. So what would be your definition of success? Or do you feel like you've reached that success?
This is such a funny question, because once I was in an artist talk where this guy who wrote a lot, Al Burian, asked this question somewhat rhetorically, and I very immediately realized my definition of success at that time was when my parents stopped complaining. When they stopped asking me to like get a part-time job at Whole Foods just to get health insurance, or whatever it was. Because then I was like on the Martha Stewart show, or I was on the cover of a magazine, or I had won another grant, or one of these things had happened to get them off my back. So that was like some kind of a success. Now I think success is just like if I have the time to actualize my dreams, because I feel like compared to what I'm capable of, I have done no work yet. Like I had a solo show at the Houston Center for Contemporary Craft, and I got to make this big chandelier of glass rain and an installation that involved all these laser cut textile plants and glass bees and all of these different elements. And I was so excited because it was the biggest thing I had ever made. But what I want to do next is actually make dioramas of fantasy landscapes and photograph those as illustrations for children's books. And there's a book agent at Random House who wants to see whatever I make whenever I get to it. But it's like, I just have to get through getting rid of more stuff so the fire marshal gets off my case because of the studio, and these logistical things that have more tangible deadlines immediately before me. I've been putting it off for a long time, doing these children's books, because I've been maybe giving more time to helping other people in my life, and that's okay, because that's what I have to do now. I can't do it later. I can't do it at any other time. And the longer that I wait to make these books, the more refined my ideas become, and the more sort of edited my lifetime's collection of vintage craft supplies that I intend to employ in making these dioramas. It's going to be great to have a project where I can finally use all the stuff that I've been saving like a magpie for forever.
And when you're doing work like this, how the heck do you ever know what kind of prices to put on things?
I always try to pay myself at least $60 an hour, or at least $50 an hour. But I think it's not just about how much you want to get paid per hour. It's also about how long did it take you to be able to be good enough to execute the things that you want to be able to make. And not even also like the material costs or the overhead of what the studio costs, or insurance, or whatever fuel, whatever you might be paying for. I think it's also a sense of, well, if I'm sorry, I don't mean to sound dehumanizing and disrespectful, but if schmucks are paying this much money for like troll beads and Pandora, then I can say this is $60 or fuck off. But you know what I mean? Like, I wouldn't actually say this to somebody's face, but it's a little bit delicious to say this to an audience of people who I feel like get it, you know, and a lot of people don't get it. So I don't know. I think it started changing when the year that I was pregnant, I spent most of that year making glass chains for Calvin Klein's runway shows. And so I did like 100 feet of glass chains for necklaces and belts for the fall winter 2014 collection, I think it was. I was able to charge them whatever I wanted and they didn't flinch. And I wanted to be realistic, so I was charging them like $150 an hour. And it was really nice to be pregnant and not stressed about money. It was really a luxury, or not a luxury. It should just be that way. And it was that way for me. And I was lucky to have it that way. Now I find that a lot of my friends who are not necessarily younger than me, but not as experienced with selling their work, they really undervalue themselves. You set the example for how you want to be treated. And if you say, well, this is $800, you don't have to explain yourself all the time, I would hope. And I've gotten to a point where I can just, there are enough mediated representations of me and my work that enough strangers have maybe put me on a pedestal to think, yes, this is valuable, even though the work itself should be good enough without all of that external validation. It's annoying that I can be at a craft show and I understand those environments are really overstimulating. There's too much to see. Maybe the people walking around are afraid to make eye contact because they just don't have it to give. They're afraid to engage. I get that. I mean, I just want to act like it's a museum and I don't have to look at people and I'll just focus on the objects. But this is why I think art gallery openings are really difficult, because work can never be as interesting or more interesting than people. And if you're at a place that's really full, maybe you'll just run into your friends and forget to actually look at the work. So I think that I wish that people would see the work as good enough on its own. But if I'm doing a show and I happen to have a page of me in a magazine, then everybody's like, oh, you're more valuable now because of this kind of external validation. And it doesn't mean that the work is better, that's for sure. Magazines that used to publish in print just needed new content every month for, much of the rest of our lives before everything went more digital. And so I think it wasn't that hard to get into print, but also maybe I'm a little bit of an aesthetic anomaly to a lot of people. So they're like, oh, you look interesting, you look different. Let's put you on the cover, or let's include you in this way.
I think that's a really cool perspective. And I really liked right away when you said it's not only the time it took for you to do it, but it's the amount of experience it took for you to get to that point. Or even for your books, like you've been planning these for your whole life.
Yeah.
Time should be considered as part of it.
And aside from that time as well, it's like the value of an idea. How do you price that? Because lots of people will look at the work of, Jackson Pollock or Pablo Picasso, or people who were Duchamp or whatever, people who were considered new thinkers in their times. And now when people look at it, it's kind of been done, or it's nothing new to them. But that's what I think that's part of what made some of those people interesting, is like new ways of thinking. And then how do you quantify that? It's so subjective. So you can make it up as you go along, and you get to, hopefully you are or will get to a place where you're free enough to make it up for yourself. And if you say, yeah, this is what it is, there are going to be some people who believe you and respect it, at least some.
Such a good perspective.
And I'm just sitting here like processing all of this. And
cool.
It's just a really nice perspective to hear from someone else who has been like able to experience so many like big media things and have your work out in so many different places.
That isn't actually me. These mediated representations of me are not who I am, and I cannot control them. And maybe it enables me to indirectly build a bridge to more people, or for them to become aware of my existence. But I don't really try to control it, because it doesn't really matter. It's sort of not real. And also, I just don't really care. Like, as a person who didn't own a car until I was 37 weeks pregnant, and I had been biking 5 miles every day for the first 37 weeks of being pregnant, and then before that, just biking my whole life and dressing colorfully, a lot of people just saw me as another thing of interest in the landscape because I wear a lot of bright colors and I wasn't concealed in a metal box as I traveled across my town, you know? And so in that way, that is a kind of fame because there are more people who maybe were aware of me than I had been introduced to. And it just is. It doesn't have to be something that I assign value to or think about too much. It just is. You can't really control what other people think of you, and it really shouldn't matter anyway if you're lucky enough to be as free as I feel. Again, that the most important opinion in your life should be your own. And that when other people are trying to tell you how to be, it's like, why do they care? You know, you don't get to make decisions for other people's bodies and lives and time. And I feel like it's just a way that people are trying to get you to conform to what they're comfortable to or what they feel like should be the norm. Or they don't feel like they hold enough power in their own lives. And they try to hold it over other people, or they're threatened by you being an aberration from what they expect. And all of that is just oppressive.
And I think you talked about this at the beginning just a little bit, but how has being a parent affected how you've been able to like create and explore?
What's really cool about hanging out with a young person is that it legitimizes it gives you permission to be more playful and in public. You know, if I just went to a playground and started swinging, people might be like, get out of here, you creep. Maybe. But for me to be there with a child, it's like, oh, you make sense. We trust you. Sure. Talk in funny voices all you want. That's regular. So hanging out with children extends your own childhood and enables you and encourages you to continue to be playful. And I like the privilege of curating a childhood. I get to respect this person's intelligence from like the day that they're born. And so I never spoke to them in baby talk. I just always spoke to them with hopefully an intelligent vocabulary because they are the wettest clay that they have ever been. So I want to make the best impressions. And when I first started taking them to museums, I remember they were 1 month old and I was wearing them. We went to the RISD Museum and I looked around and I said to them, every single thing here was made by someone who was once a baby, just as you are now. And in saying that, I accidentally buoyed myself and I was like, oh crap, I can do anything. Like I had forgotten, you know? And so it's a real treat to try harder to be your best self for modeling the best behavior for these tiny people who are kind of naturally, you know, if you're a parent, you'll know what I'm saying, hedonistic assholes. It's really a special treat, and it's all going by very, very quickly. It's going to be too brief. I know it. I mean, I look at kids. I just was like seeing a toddler on the sidewalk today, and it wasn't that long ago that my kid was a toddler, but now kindergarten, they just finished kindergarten. They're more than 60 pounds. They're more than 4 feet tall, and they were literally strong before they were born. But they're going to make a fine studio assistant pretty soon, I think. Our current ritual is we'll like walk down the bike path to the studio or maybe bike. And I will get on the torch while they use a VCR on their own to watch a curated library of VHS tapes, including like Sailor Moon and Fraggle Rock. And they're really getting into, what is this? Miyazaki movies. Yeah. And then at home, I show them a lot of like Jan Svankmajer animation or a lot of the stuff that I find on thisiscolossal.com. And it's cool to see how these other works act as sparks that ignite fires in this young imagination. What a privilege to be able to do that.
And you think that they're going to become an artist, or do you think that they have other inspirations or other roles in their lives?
They change their mind all the time, and that's fine. Everyone in my family does 1,000 different things, and they'll fit right in. My secret hope, once I get more of this stuff out of the way, I fantasize about just having a different science experiment to do every day after school when they're free. My secret hope is to introduce them to a lot of like principles of physics, and that we'll invent a bunch of stuff together, or that like they might become an inventor, because I want them to be able to think creatively and then also think in scientific ways. But it's not my choice. It's their life. They get to do whatever they want. I don't get to tell them who they are. I get to listen, you know? And that has been another concept that's been hard for a few grownups in our life, because my kid's gender fluid. I mean, I also identify as that. But when my kid was 2, they started talking about wanting to cut off their penis because they were a girl. And I was like, we know lots of girls who have penises. Like, you can do whatever you want with your body, but at least live in it longer before you decide to make a big change that's harder to reverse. But I love you unconditionally. Just keep telling me how you feel. I got your back no matter what. And multiple times, just being in stores with my kid and talking to them, multiple strangers have approached me and said, I wish I was a baby so you could be my parent. But especially trans and queer folks have come up to me and said that to me. And I'm just excited for the future, because I feel like a lot of kids are, you know, to be gender fluid or to be non-binary or to be genderqueer is like more socially acceptable or normative depending on where you are and who you're around. And I'm excited about the world that all of those young people are building, because it's hopefully going to be like more comfortable with themselves, and a world that's more full of love and accepting, and not just trying to like force ideologies onto other people's bodies. The problem was a set of grandparents who, whenever the kid would say, I'm a girl, they would like vehemently react, no, you're not, you're a boy. And then I would remind them, and my kid would only say it in front of them if I was there, because they knew that I would call them on their shit and say, we don't get to tell other people how they feel in their bodies. We get to listen. And that even if a person is just very, very young, that doesn't mean that their feelings aren't valid and that they shouldn't be heard. It's like more crucial than ever to listen to them at that point, I think. I'm excited for the future. I feel like what we're living through right now is the death rattle of a lot of things. And obviously climate change is a terrifying thing, but also the planet has been through worse and come back at least like half a dozen times, you know? So if humans go extinct, there will always be and humans are nature. We're just probably some of the best and worst animals that have ever existed on this planet, for sure. But nature's always going to win. And I'm not talking about humans in that statement. But when I see plants that grow through fences and break through asphalt, nature's always going to win. I have faith in life. I take a lot of comfort in that too, you know? Like if you're ever feeling stressed, don't forget to look at the sky.
Or the moss growing on the sidewalk.
Yes, yeah. Moss, yes. I love moss. Nature's velvet.
So that is mostly your way of dealing with stress, is to like step back and to kind of connect with nature a little bit more?
Sometimes, and I'm lucky because there's a lot of green space around where I live now, and I'm surrounded by animals, and I see like bunnies and groundhogs and birds and butterflies every day. I don't mow my lawn, and there are lots of wildflowers, and I walk out of the house through a cloud of butterflies, and there are dragonflies and darning needles everywhere, and bumblebees. I call them fuzzy bumblebutts. Pollinating all of these flowers around, and it just smells so fragrant. So like, I'm lucky because the house that I bought was occupied by gardeners for 60 years, even though I'm like neglecting the yard and the lawn. There's just so much life that is coming back because I don't put Roundup on everything like a lot of the neighbors do. And I think this combination of phrases helps me the most. You won't always be here and it won't always be now. One thing that you can always rely on, the one constant in all of our lives, will be that time will continue to move forward, or at least our perception of it. That's like one thing you can count on. And so if you don't like something, try to allow yourself to have the patience to wait for it to pass. Or if you do like something, well, then appreciate it while you can and maybe work to create the conditions for it to happen again in the future. Or if you don't like something, work to create the conditions for it to not happen again. But usually I'll just try to like distract myself with something beautiful and remember that time is going to keep moving forward.
I think we all need to hear that now, especially with COVID.
Yeah. I feel like the most excruciating part of it was the very beginning, when it felt so terrifying and uncertain and there was so much that we didn't know. And when art supply stores closed, and I was like, oh God, how long is this going to go on for?
What do I do?
Like, I think I need to go buy iridescent fabric right now. And I don't really buy stuff online. I really like going to stores and being able to touch something or see in person how the light moves off of it or through it or whatever it is. And even though I have such a stockpile of fabrics and materials, it was just like another way that I could try to feel free or in control in my life. To be able to go buy some inspiring new fabric that I hadn't seen before that was going to spark something else. I did so much hand sewing during COVID, just like with a needle and thread, making dresses at night while my kid was asleep and matching masks.
It's like a cozy space to be stuck in.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
That was so good.
Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Thank you for asking and listening.
So do you have like words of wisdom to share with everybody? Like one last little thing? No pressure.
Yeah. I think it is helpful to try to be your own parent in a way and be as loving and as nurturing as you need, but can't always ask for or don't feel like other people around you necessarily have that to give. So to be as like tender and gentle to yourself as you would if you were your own baby, to be that kind and that like indulging. And so to ask yourself, if you're upset about something, what are you upset about? What can we do to help you feel better? Or what do you really want and why? To remember to ask yourself those questions so that you can remember to zoom out and to learn from yourself and to grow, to figure out what your patterns are, to heal them if you need. But that also, you don't need to wait for other people to love you. You can give that to yourself. And the more you have, then the more you have to give. And then it's easier to be kind and patient and loving with everyone around you because we all have more in common than not. And so it's easier to just like be human, and that peacefulness is healing people and the world when you can do that.
That's beautiful.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was so good.
I'm really in love with being alive. It's such an honor and a privilege to be on this plane of existence. And I want to do the most good while I can.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of Connected in Glass. Make sure to follow us on Facebook and Instagram for more information on the artists we interview and for updates on the podcast.